Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to lecture 4 of our series of lectures about grammatical rules and systems. In this lecture we'll begin with defining a clause. So what is a clause? We will try to say some and give you some idea about a clause and what constitutes a clause. So we'll begin with this bit of information. A complete sentence needs at least one finite independent clause. So for a sentence in English to be complete, it needs at least one. It can have more, but it needs at least one finite independent clause. The meaning of finite is that it shows time, it shows person, and it shows number. And we will see this in detail in a few minutes. The meaning of independent is that it can occur on its own as a sentence. So, for example, he is a student who likes to study hard. Okay, so he is a student is one clause and it can occur on its own, so we can just say he is a student. But the other clause, who likes to study hard, is not independent, it is dependent. We call it a dependent clause because we can't say who likes to study hard, full stop. Okay, so it can't be a sentence on its own. So for a complete sentence in English we need at least one finite and independent clause. A simple sentence, as you remember, we discussed types of sentences. We said we have simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. So simple sentences are composed of only one finite clauses. So a simple sentence has only one finite clause. So if you want to know what is the meaning of a finite clause, just look at a simple sentence and you will see a finite clause, one finite clause. So that the structure of a finite clause is identical. It is the same as a simple sentence. Okay, so finite clause equals one simple sentence. Okay, one finite clause equals one simple sentence. Here are some examples of one clause sentences. So we have several examples of sentences that have only one clause. In number 1 here, I have just telephoned Muhammad. We have a subject, I. We have a verbal group, have telephoned, and then Muhammad, of course, and just is in between the helping verb and the main verb. So this is just one clause. Okay, so it is one clause and it is a sentence. Okay, it is a one clause sentence. Number 2, he was my best friend. Subject, verb, and then this is of course one clause. It is only one clause sentence. 3, this is his photograph. This subject is verb, so we have only one clause, and this is a one clause sentence as well. At 9 o'clock we all gathered in the classroom. So we all is a pronominal group, if you remember from our previous lectures, and then we have gathered, the verb, and the pronominal group is the subject. So we have one subject, one verb, one clause sentence. Okay, so this is also a one clause sentence. Number 5, he always does his work perfectly. He is a subject, does is the verb here. So this is, we only have one subject and a verb, so this is only one clause sentence. Each of these one clause sentences has a subject and a predicate. Okay, so the predicate is what is said about the subject. So for example, in number 5, he always does his work perfectly. He is the subject and everything else is the predicate. So always does his work perfectly, all that we call a predicate. Okay, including the verb. In number 4, at 9 o'clock we all gathered in the classroom. We all is the subject and everything else is the predicate, including what comes before and what comes after the subject. So at 9 o'clock is part of the predicate, in the classroom is also part of the predicate. and also gathered the verb part of the predicate. So we have a subject when we have a predicate. The subject and the predicate is what is said about the subject. Okay? If either of those parts, subject or predicate, were missing, so if we don't have a subject or if we don't have a predicate, the sentence would not be complete. Okay, so if we want to have a complete sentence, we need both elements. We need a subject and a predicate. However, there is an exception. In an imperative, the subject is usually unstated. So we don't mention it, we don't say it, but it is still there, and we can expand the sentence to make the subject visible. So, for example, go study. This is an imperative. You remember when we mentioned the types of sentences, we said we have statements, we have questions, we have commands, which we also call imperative. So imperative or command is a type of sentences which normally we don't state the subject in, but we can assume that it means you, or it is you. Okay, so when the subject is missing in an imperative, we can assume that it is you, the person or persons spoken to. So the previous example here can be expanded as follows. So instead of go study, you can say you go study. Okay, so this is the subject. You is the subject, but normally we don't say that. We just say go study, stand up, sit down. We don't mention the subject in the imperative. The subject of a clause is a noun phrase, and you remember in our previous lectures we discussed noun phrases in detail. So the subject is a noun phrase, the predicate is a verb phrase. Okay, so all the predicate can be called a verb phrase, and every finite clause has the following basic structure. So MP plus VP. So the MP, the noun phrase, is the subject. The VP, the verb phrase, is the predicate. So the man, this is the MP, bought a new car, this is the VP. Okay, so the man is the subject, bought a new car is the predicate. Okay, VP can also be used to talk about verbal groups. So we can use it to talk about the predicate as a whole, or we can use it to talk about verbal groups. Okay, so a verb phrase can have two uses. Here we use it as a label for the whole predicate. Okay, so let's see how we some information or about verb phrases. We will start with telling you what a verb phrase consists of. So a verb phrase, or VP, consists of a finite verb only. So sometimes it has a finite verb only, one finite verb. So, for example, we all waited. We all waited. Waited is the verb here, and it is finite. Okay, and we will tell you what is the meaning of finite in a minute. More often, the BP consists of a group of words, which is called a verbal group. So the VP can be one finite verb, or it can be a verbal group. And this verbal group has a finite verb as its head. You remember we mentioned what is the head, and in verbal groups we have a head which is a finite verb. So for a clause to be finite, there must be a finite verb in it. So if you want the clause to be finite, we need to have a finite verb in it. And if you want a complete sentence, we must have a finite clause. Okay, so a complete sentence must have a finite clause, and a finite clause must have a finite verb. Okay, the verb can be either simple or complex. So a simple verb is just one word. So for example, is, was, walked, sat, did. It can be just one verb, and we call this simple verb. The second type is a complex verb. So a complex verb consists of a verbal group, so more than one verb. For example, have telephoned, were placed, were waiting, did not like, and could see. So here we have a helping verb, an auxiliary verb, and a main verb. So have telephoned, have is an helping verb, an auxiliary verb, and telephoned is the main verb, or we can call the main verb the full verb. Okay, it has two names. We can either call it the main verb or the full verb. Were placed, were is the helping verb, placed is the main verb. Were waiting, it's the same. Were is the helping verb, waiting is the main verb. Did not like, did is the helping verb and like is the main verb. So did like is a complex verb. It is composed of a verbal group, okay? And could see as well. Here we have a modal which functions as an auxiliary, modal auxiliary. It is a helping verb, and see is the main verb. We'll talk a little bit about finite and non-finite verbs. So we mentioned finite a few times in this lecture. We will see what it means exactly. Okay, so finite or finite verbs show tense, person, and number. Okay, so they are affected if we change the tense. So if it is in the present and if it is in the past, it will be affected. It will be affected by person, first person, second person, third person, and it will be affected by number, singular or plural. The verb be in the following sentences is an example of a finite verb. Of course, you know, the verb be can be either is, am, are, was, were, or been in the past participle. We'll see how it is affected here as an example of a finite verb. So the first set of examples, he is here and they are here. You will notice that the verb be changed because we changed the person and number of the subject. So he is singular and it is third person, so it takes is. Okay, he is here. So the form of the verb was affected by the subject, by person and number. When we change the person and number, it becomes, for example, they are. They is a third person and it is plural. So because of number here, we changed the verb to are. So we said they are. So if the verb changes according to person and number, it is a finite verb. Okay, he is here today, he was here yesterday. In this set of examples, we changed the tense. So in the first example, he is here today, this is in the present, so we say is, we use is. The second sentence, he was here yesterday, we're talking about the past, so was refers to the past. Okay, so depending on tense, the verb can change form, so it either becomes is or was. All right, so a finite verb is affected by tense, person, and number. Finite verbs can have three forms. So the first form of a finite verb is the base form or the simple form of the verb. So the verb without any additions. We don't add ed, we don't add ing, just the verb as it is. For example, walk, talk, drink, and speak. So these are all examples of the base form or the simple form of the verb. The second form of finite verbs is third person singular form, or the third person singular form of the verb. So this is with the addition of the inflection s. Okay, the third person singular marker s. So walk becomes walks when we have a third person singular subject in the present, of course. Talk becomes talks, we add s to it. Drink, drinks. Speak, speaks. Okay, so this is the second form. We call it the third person singular form. The third form of a finite verb is the simple past form, the simple past form. And of course, you remember that verbs can either be regular or irregular verbs. Okay, so the first two verbs we have here are regular. So walk, we just add ed, it becomes walked, and talk becomes talked. In the case of drink and speak, it is irregular, or they are irregular. So their past form is drank. In the case of drink, drink, drank. This is the past form. Speak, the past form of speak is spoke. Okay, so speak, spoke. All right. We will do a small exercise here. What is the form of the finite verb in each sentence? So you either choose A if it is a base form, B if it is a third person singular form, or C if it is a past form. So look at each sentence and see the verb and choose which form it takes in these sentences. So in number 1, the manager talked to the employees. The verb is talked, and it is in the past because we have ed here, so the answer is C. So number 1, C. Number 2, he drinks coffee every morning. Drinks is the verb here, and we see the third person singular marker S, and so it is a third person singular verb. Okay, so it is the third person singular form of the verb. So the correct choice for 2 is B. 3, Ahmed and Khalid usually study together. The verb here is study, and as you notice, we don't have ed, we don't have the third person singular marker, so it is the base form of the verb. The fourth sentence, so the answer for number 3 is A, base form. Number 4, I went to the mall yesterday. Went is an irregular verb, of course, and so it is from go, went, so the past form of go, so the correct answer here is C. Okay, C, it is the past form of the verb go. Number 5, at 8 o'clock every morning my father goes to work. The verb here is goes, and it is the third person singular form. So go, goes, that we added es to the end of the verb, and so the correct choice for number 5 is B. Okay, so goes is the third person singular form of the verb go. Okay, we move on to discuss non-finite verbs. So we saw that finite verbs are affected by tense, person, and number. The opposite of that is or are non-finite verbs. So non-finite verbs do not show tense, person, and number. So the verb come, for example, in the following sentence is an example of a non-finite verb. So they are not affected, they do not change even if we change the tense, the person, or the number. Let's look at the examples. I expect him to come soon. We expect them to come soon. So you notice we changed the verb, the subject. So in the first sentence, we have a first person singular subject, I, and in the second sentence, we have a second person plural subject, we, but still the verb come didn't change. Okay, so it is the same in the first and second sentence. So come is the same because it is non-finite. It doesn't change because of tense, person, or number. In this case, person and number didn't affect the verb come. It is still the same in both cases. The next set of examples, he is coming now, and he was coming at the same time yesterday. Okay, so coming didn't change even though we changed the tense here. So he is coming now, this is in the present. He was coming at the same time yesterday, this is in the past, but still coming didn't change. Okay, so coming is a non-finite verb. But look at is, okay, verb to be, as we said, in these cases it is a finite verb. So is and was are finite verbs. Coming in both sentences is non-finite. Okay, so let's look at the forms of non-finite verbs. We looked at the forms of finite verbs. Non-finite verbs also have 3 forms. The first one is the infinitive. So the infinitive has the same form as the base. So the base form, the simple form of the verb, this is the form of the infinitive. So no addition, no ed, no ing, nothing. Just the base form of the verb. It is often preceded by an infinitive marker to. So to is called an infinitive marker. Okay, it can come before the infinitive when we write it as the base form of the verb. So in some cases, for example, after modal auxiliary verbs, the infinitive is bare. We call it a bare infinitive if it doesn't have to. Okay, so a bare infinitive is an infinitive without to. So we have an infinitive with to and an infinitive without to. The second type, the infinitive without to, is called the bare infinitive. So we have two examples here. I am waiting for him to come. So in this sentence, to come is an infinitive with to. Come is in the base form, so it is in the simple form of the verb come. Okay, it's not in the past came. It's not in the we didn't add ing. We didn't say coming. So come, the base form, and we have to before it, so it is an infinitive with to. In the second example, he can come tomorrow. Okay, we have can here, which is a modal auxiliary verb, and the verb after it, come, is in the base form, and it is an infinitive. Okay, so it is not finite, unlike I come here every day. Okay, I come here every day, come is finite, but in this case, okay, he can come tomorrow. Can come, because can is a modal auxiliary and come came after it. Come is considered an infinitive, and it is not marked with to, so there is no infinitive marker. It is called a bare infinitive. The second form of non-finite verbs is the present participle. The present participle, which is the verb plus ing. Okay, so it is also called ing participle. For example, walking, talking, drinking, and speaking. So verb plus ing is called present participle. The third form of non-finite verbs is the past participle. So past participle, you are familiar with it, of course, from your previous studies. It is also called ed participle. So the verb plus ed, and there is a special form for irregular verbs. So walked and talked are regular, so this is the past participle form, and drunk and spoken are irregular, and this is the past participle form of these two verbs. So drink is the simple form, the base form, drank is the past form, and drunk is the past participle form. The past form is, as we mentioned, finite. The past participle is non-finite. Spoken is the same. Speak, spoke, spoken. Spoken is the past participle of the verb speak, and it is non-finite. It doesn't change depending on tense, number, and person. Let's look at this exercise. Decide whether the underlined verbs are A, finite, B, non-finite. Number one, he was able to walk after physical therapy. Okay, so is this verb walk, the underlined verb walk, finite or non-finite? Does it change if we change the subject? So if we say they, okay, do we have to change walk? So for example here, they were able, was changes because it is finite. We say they were able to walk, walk stays the same. So walk in this case is non-finite. It doesn't change because of number or person. Okay, so the answer for number one is B, non-finite. Two, he is making a chair out of wood. So does this change? So if we say they, does making change? No, it doesn't. So we say they are making. Are changes because it is finite, but making stays the same. So it is non-finite. So making is also non-finite. B. Three, he made a chair yesterday in his workshop. Okay, so made, if we change the tense here, will it change? So if we say he, something that he does every day, so he makes a chair every day, so yes, it changes. Okay, so the verb change, the verb made changes according to tense, so this is why it is finite. It is a finite verb. The correct answer here is A, finite. If we change the tense, the verb will change. Number 4, you should spend more time studying. Okay, so we can change the subject as we wish. We can say they should spend more time studying, he should spend more time studying, I should spend more time studying. You will notice spend, that never changes. Okay, it doesn't change in this case because it comes after a modal auxiliary should. Should is a modal auxiliary, and the verb after it is non-finite. So the correct answer for number 4 is B. Spend is non-finite. Number 5, they spend time together every Thursday. Spend, if we change the subject here, if we make it he, okay, does it change? Yes, it does. Okay, so if we say he spends time with his brother every day. Okay, so he spends, you will notice we need to use the third person singular form in this case. So the verb changes, and this is why we call it a finite verb. So the answer for number 5 is A. Okay, finite versus non-finite clauses. We mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the lecture. We will come back to it here. So a finite clause is a clause which has a finite verb. Okay, so again, for a clause to be finite, it must have a finite verb. So for example, he is waiting for the headmaster to come. The previous example here has a finite verbal group, is waiting. So this is this clause is finite as well. So we have a finite verbal group, and we have a finite clause. So he is waiting is a finite clause because it has is waiting, which is a finite verbal group. So finite clause has a finite verb. A non-finite clause is a clause which does not have a finite verb. So if we don't have a finite verb, if we have an unfinite verb, we have an unfinite clause. Okay, so for example, the previous example that we mentioned, he is waiting for the headmaster to come. For the headmaster to come, okay, we have a subject, the headmaster, and we have the verb to come, but here it is non-finite. It is an infinitive with to come, an infinitive with to. So for the headmaster to come has an unfinite verb, which is to come, but does not have a finite verb, and this is why it is an unfinite clause. So again, a finite clause has a finite verb, an unfinite clause does not have a finite verb. Okay, it has a non-finite verb. At least one clause in an English sentence must be finite. We mentioned this already as well. So one clause must be finite if we want to have a complete sentence. So simple sentences consist of only one finite clause. So for example, he is a student, is a finite verb, okay, and we only have one clause, so this is a simple sentence. So one clause, one finite clause with one finite verb, this is a simple sentence. Compound and complex sentences consist of two or more clauses with at least one finite clause. Okay, so compound and complex sentences have two or more clauses in them. At least one of these two, or if they have more, at least one of these clauses must be finite. So it must have a finite verb, and it must be a finite clause. So at least one of the two, or if we have more than two clauses, at least one of the clauses must be finite. So for example, he is waiting for the headmaster to come. He is waiting is a finite clause, for the headmaster to come is a non-finite clause, and this is a complete sentence because we have a finite clause with a finite verb in it, is. Okay, is a finite verb, and this is why we call this a finite clause. Okay, so this is the end of this lecture. We will continue discussing verbs and verbal groups in the next lecture, inshallah. Thank you for listening.